They've worked in large, mid-sized, and small law firms, corporations, government, and legal clinics. They practice or have practiced health law, administrative law, immigration law, corporate law, securities and pension litigation, intellectual property, class actions, professional discipline, privacy law, international and domestic trade law, and they've been involved in inquests as well as public inquiries, including the Arar Inquiry and the Walkerton Inquiry. So the format for this evening is that we have selected topics for discussion. The panelists have chosen particular issues that they will address, and other panel members may offer their perspectives as well if they so wish and add more information. We've allocated some time at the end of the panel discussion to entertain questions from the audience. And at about 7 o'clock tonight, the Treasurer of the Law Society, Janet Miner, will be joining us. She is the 4th woman treasurer of the Law Society, and she is the first treasurer whose career has been in the public sector. Then we'll have a networking reception after she speaks, and where you can mingle with your colleagues and other members of the audience, including the panel members and members of the board. Jackie Stevenson is here, and Aisha Layden will be here, and Shelley Quinn may be here as well, and myself. So I am delighted to introduce our panel members. Keya Dasgupta, about 1, 2, 3 in, is at Norton Rose Fulbright Canada, LLP, Learning and Development Director. Avvy Go, to her left, Clinic Director, Metro Toronto Chinese and Southeast Legal Clinic, and is a Law Society bencher. To her left, Freya Kristjanson, Counsel at Wardle, Dale, Bernstein, Bieber, LLP. To my right here is Michelle Moldofsky, former General Counsel at St. Michael's Hospital. And to my left is Maud Murray, Deputy Director of the Legal Services Branch of the Ministry of Government, Consumer Services, and Ministry of Citizenship, Immigration, and International Trade. What a mouthful.
My voicemail message is very interesting.
So I would like at this juncture, and I'm going to sit down in a moment, to ask the panel members to provide just a short synopsis of their legal career, because I just rattled off all these different areas they practice, and you see 5 women here, and you're saying to yourself, how many areas do they practice in? Who practices what? So just a short synopsis of what they're doing at the moment in their career path. So I'd like to start with Keya Dasgupta.
Hi everyone, I'm really happy to be here. My name is Keya Dasgupta, and as Rhonda said, I've had a diverse career in law. I've been practicing, I was called to the bar 12 years ago, and I spent my first 8 years in private practice. I actually articled and summered at an intellectual property boutique firm, and then I moved to a regional firm in Atlantic Canada where I practiced in the area of general litigation, but I maintained a trademark prosecution practice. And I spent my final 6 years in private practice at a national law firm based in the Toronto office, practicing in intellectual property litigation with a focus mainly on pharmaceutical litigation matters. And then I made a big leap and a departure from private practice, still in a private practice setting, but I've spent the last 4 years as Director of Learning and Development at Norton Rose Fulbright Canada, and it's a really exciting role. I'm part of a global team that designs and delivers programs for our lawyers, our business services professionals, and our clients, and it's not centered around the substantive law knowledge. It's all about professional skills. It's that other set of skills you need to be successful as practitioners, whether that is leadership skills, networking skills, business development skills, and something I'm really, really passionate about. And so that's been my focus for the last 4 years.
Thanks very much, Keya. Freya and Keya.
Great, thank you. I was called to the bar in 1989. I went to UVic Law School. I didn't have any lawyers in my family, so I really had no idea what to do. And the advice I got at that time, which was good advice, was to go to a big firm where you'll get first-rate training and experience on large files, good writing skills, and so on. So I went to BLG, and I'm very glad I did, and I ended up spending 20 years at BLG. And I was an equity partner. I had a great career, I would say in large part because very early on when I joined, Dennis O'Connor, who subsequently became Associate Chief Justice of Ontario, was my mentor, and he's sort of been with me every step of the way. So I was doing a mixture of commercial litigation and public law with Dennis. He went to the bench. I was completely devastated. And lo and behold, a couple of years later, he started on the Walkerton inquiry and retained me as commission counsel, together with Paul Cavalluzzo and Brian Gover and Ronda Bessner, who I met on the Walkerton inquiry, which was an extraordinary experience. And at the end of it, I got pregnant and had a baby. So I took a leave of absence for a year and a half, then a 6-month maternity leave. Didn't know what to do, went back, and it's hard when you have a big file to rebuild your practice, and I've done it a number of times now. But I did, and was doing a lot of pension litigation and other things, and then the Arar inquiry came along, which was an immersion for 2 years into this very odd national security world, and I traveled. I went to Belgium and Norway and Sweden and other places, meeting spies and their overseers, becoming really paranoid and thinking a lot about civil liberties and national security and, some of these key issues, which has no application in private practice, I will tell you right now. But I learned a lot about accountability, which I do a lot of work now in accountability and oversight issues. I came back from Arar and I decided I wasn't going to be happy in the big firm environment, not because, I loved it. I loved the people and the work, but what I like to do, acting for public bodies, has a discounted rate structure. And it's very difficult in a large Bay Street firm to do public interest law for public bodies and make money at it. So I joined Cavalluzzo, Shilton, McIntyre, Cornish, which is a 35-lawyer boutique labor firm where Paul Cavalluzzo worked. Had a great time there. I acted for Mayor McCallion in a public inquiry, which was so excellent. And then I ran into conflict of interest issues. I was building up a public sector practice, and they act for public sector unions. So now I had to leave because of conflicts, and I've recently joined in February Wardle Daly, which is a 9-lawyer firm. And I went through a process in terms of where I wanted to go next, but it's a really nice litigation boutique that I think suits me and my interests.
So large firm, then a medium-sized firm, and now we're a smaller firm. To my right, Maud.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So my year of call, can everyone hear me? My year of call is 2007. I went to Osgood and did the CLASP program. I don't know if those of you who did go to Osgood know about CLASP. So I knew right away that I wanted to work in the public interest, and got a summer position, a second-year summer position at Clark, Crown Law Office Civil, and summered there. Then I was asked to come back as articling student, which was fantastic. Articled there, and partway through my articles, my husband and I decided that we were going to start our family. We thought it would take us a while, but it didn't. And partway through November, I was pregnant and was called to the bar with a really big belly. I was about 8 months pregnant, I think. And so after I was called to the bar, I knew that I wanted to take a year off work. But Meg has a great program called the Hire Back Pool. And so because I was going on a maternity leave, I was able to put, you're in there for 1 year once you article with Meg. I was able to put my Hire Back Pool timeline on hold until I was ready to come back to the work world. And so took a year off and saw some positions and applied to it, and got to go back as counsel. Was in a counsel position doing mostly, in my articling role, I did a lot of litigation, and I also did some corporate commercial and some procurement work, and I knew right away that that work was better suited to me. I spent a lot of my litigation files thinking, really, if they had just done X or Y, we wouldn't be in this situation. And so I really wanted to kind of go back to the decision-making process, go back in time and see how I could help the clients make certain decisions that wouldn't get them in the situations that they were in at the time. So I knew that the advisory role was better suited to me. And frankly, the life-work balance, that litigation, I think, whether you're in private sector or public sector, it's a beast, and you have to be willing to and prepared to give it the time that it requires. And I knew that that wasn't something that, one, I was very interested in, and two, that worked with our family, our family life decisions that we had made. So following that, I came back, as I said, in advisory, worked for a few years there, and then I had my second pregnancy with my daughter. My first one was a son, by the way, my son Thomas. And with my daughter Simone, I took a year off again. And while I was on leave, I decided, this is a really good time for me to do a bit of a change in my career. And I wanted to do a year just to try something else out. I've been in public sector, and I really wanted to try out what is it like in the firm? What is it like in a firm environment? So I decided to ask for a leave of absence, but there were conflict of interest issues because I wanted to work with public sector clients, and I am a Crown employee, so it wasn't going to work out quite well. Some of the agencies have different interests. So I decided to resign from government, which was a huge decision at the time. My father-in-law, I remember quite clearly saying to me, "You just had your second child. What are you thinking? Like, really? Are you sure this is the right decision for you?" But it was very new. I was early in my career, and I thought this was a time that I could take some chances and just try it out. Let's see what happens. I wasn't 30 years in that I was be worried about my pension, etc. So I tried it and did it for a year, then went back to an agency, and then went back again into government, but in a management role. So now I'm with Government and Consumer Services and Citizenship and Immigration, and we have such a broad range of law that we deal with. We deal with consumer services issues, we deal with Land Titles Act issues, we deal with procurement issues, we deal with legislative drafting, you name it, MGCS we do, and then of course immigration and international trade. And I lead a team of 17 lawyers, which is fantastic, a great group of people who are very passionate about their work and make my job a bit easier, I think. So that's my story in a nutshell.
Thank you. Avvy. Avvy, who's also a bencher.
Right. Can you hear me? Okay. So I guess my going to law school was a huge misunderstanding. I just finished my third year undergrad, and I've only been in Canada for 3 years at that time. And somebody told me that you should go to law school, become an immigration consultant, and make a lot of money. And I didn't know that you don't have to go to law school to become an immigration consultant. So I ended up in the U of T, and somebody, as like Freya mentioned, somebody advised me, if you don't know where you want to go, article on Bay Street, and then you can decide where you want to go next, right? So it's easier to go from Bay Street to somewhere else, but not as easy the other way around. So I article on Weir and Falls. But by then I was already involved in community organizations and so on, and because I did downtown legal services, so I kind of, sort of made the decision that maybe Bay Street is not exactly for me. So an opportunity came up, so I worked for East Toronto Community Legal Clinic as soon as I was called to the bar. Stayed there for 6 months, went to Parkdale for 6 months, and then the job where I'm holding today, 20-some years later, came up, so I became the clinic director of the Metro Chinese and Southeast Asian Clinic just 1 year after I was called. So I've been a boss since then. There's a lot of good things about being a boss, so you can kind of pick and choose what you want to do, right? But it's a very small clinic. There are only 2 paid lawyers positions. So we do a lot of immigration work because of the clientele we have. We do a lot of employment work for precarious workers, but we also do a mixture of many different things. So like even tax cases, like for instance, like women who are dinged with overpayment in child tax benefit, we have to go to tax court for them. All kinds of things that our client deals with and we try to deal with. But on top of that, because of the specialty nature of the clinic, so we do a lot of test case. So we've done inquests involving in a police shooting inquest, constitutional challenge and intervention, and of course a lot of law reform, advocacy work as well. So it's a mixture of different things, and as well as public legal education for the client community. So and apart from that, at some point I decided to kind of do something else because I want some new challenge, or I was getting bored, whatever. So I decided to run for bencher at some point, but I also decided to join, try adjudication. So I became a part-time adjudicator for the Health Professions Appeal Review Board. So I've been there since, I think, 2005. So I think my term is coming up, like, because I think there's a 10-year limit right now. So, I mean, you can do more than one thing at the same time, right? So anyway, so that's my story.
Thank you very much. Michelle.
So I have a degree in religious studies, which is an auspicious beginning to a legal career. I had this intention, this idea in my mind that I was going to become a bioethicist. I was really interested in bioethics while I was partway through my degree in religious studies. And at the time, a legal background was one of the few backgrounds you could get that would get you entry into bioethics. Now bioethics is much more of its own field than it was. So I went to law school. And I didn't really form an intention to practice law at that time. But I did decide to article because I thought, why don't I enter the profession? That would be useful. And I had some difficulty finding an articling position. It was a tough time for articling back in those days. And I spent a year actually doing odd jobs and keeping myself busy, and then eventually got a position in a general practice firm, a small firm called Morris Silver Lewis. And I was doing residential real estate, some wills and estates, a little bit of family law, a little bit of corporate law. What does that have to do with bioethics? I have no idea. But it turns out that that was very helpful for me later on in my career. At the time, I also started to volunteer on a research ethics committee. And that's where I started to get closer to my goal. So coming out of articling, finishing the bar ads, and entering into the profession, I had an idea, a great idea, of taking a year off. I was going to travel and enjoy myself. And there was this one opportunity of a law job. It was doing policy development in the realm of research ethics at the Hospital for Sick Children. Well, I couldn't pass that up. I applied for that job, but thought, well, I'm going to go travel. I didn't really expect that I would get that job, so I did. So I ended up doing policy development. Turns out that Sick Kids was revamping all of its research policies, and I was supporting an implementation committee and doing some policy development, policy implementation. It was really exciting. And at the end of my year there was an opportunity to take on a maternity leave contract because somebody who was doing contract review in the then contentious area of clinical trial agreements was going on maternity leave, and I took over that contract. From that, I ended up in progressive leadership roles in contract management, eventually legal counsel, moving to St. Michael's Hospital, and that's where I've most recently been general counsel for 3 years. At the moment, however, I am in career transition. I'm in between jobs, and so I'm in a new adventure of looking for my next step.
Thank you very much. Show of hands, just so we know the audience, how many of you have just finished your articles or are finishing your articles? How many of you are lawyers who were called under 5 years? And how many of you are returning to practice after not having been in legal practice for a while? Oh, excuse me. You can hear me, but you can't. Sorry about that. Anybody returning? Okay, that's very helpful. Just want to get a sense of the audience. So this question I'm going to direct to Keya and Freya. as it happens. So
The blue team
the
is...
blue team, you'll notice, this was not planned. We've got a mauve team, a blue team, and a burgundy team. And I keep on forgetting to use my mic, so apologies. So my question is to both of you, how did you investigate your alternatives? What resources were available to you? What role did networking play, mentoring play in your decision to move into either a less traditional or a different legal career? And being mentors to women who seek diverse career options, what can we do to help them find their path? There's lots of women here who are trying to find their path. How do we do that? So let's start with
I'm giving her the mic.
giving her the mic. Let's start with Freya, please.
Okay, so I've made kind of two big career changes from BLG to Cavaluzos and Cavaluzos to Wardle Daily. And in each of my moves, I did end up going to firms where I knew some of the lawyers, and through networking and through mentorship. So Paul Cavaluzzo and I had been commissioned counsel together. We were both retained by Justice O'Connor. We then both also did the Arar inquiry, and we were friends and colleagues. And leaving Bay Street, you actually have no idea what life is like in any other form of practice. So to me it was, you know, here's a 32 lawyer boutique firm with a lawyer I know well. So I did not do any other investigation. We'll just put it right there. So my next move, because I had to leave for conflicts purposes, it was clear to me that was going to have to be a very important issue. And I did a lot of examination at the market. And I did it probably now the way one should change firms. For the first time in my life, after, 26 years of practice, I actually did a business plan. Like a really concrete one with projections for clients and looking seriously at my billing statistics for the last few years. And I thought very concretely about what do I really need to make me happy in the practice of law and to service my clients properly. And because I do administrative law, admin and public law, and some civil litigation, I need the basic kind of litigation infrastructure, which actually is not very much. I really just need some really smart juniors and a law clerk. And what I know turns me on is that I like to be with lawyers who are engaged in the profession, who are not just there to bill and make money, but Peter Wardle's a bencher. Helen Daly I had come to know when we were both on the Advocates Society board. So, I wanted people that really understood their commitment to the profession, because I like people like that and I want to work with them. And I want to work with lawyers who are ethical and committed to both client service and changing the profession. So, when I was thinking of leaving, I basically had lunch or coffee with, every lawyer I knew practically, to talk about, how does their practice work, and especially those who were in alternative firms, and actually to ask them, what do you think would make me happy? Can you think of where I might go? So I very much used my sort of networking skills there. And in terms of the fit, I think the fit was in part because of all the work I've done on committees and speaking and, all that stuff, which I absolutely love. I totally love all of that. I've met a lot of people, and it's important to me to work together with people to communally write a legal brief that you're going to present to the legislature or to the Senate or something like that. And to work together on pro bono projects, to spend, I do have a daughter and a husband, but much of what I have got out of my legal career comes from, writing articles, comes from teaching administrative law at U of T and at Osgood, and advocacy through the Advocates Society, and that's how I have a sense of the legal world, and that's what's made me passionate, and I needed a place I could do that.
Thank you very much. Keya.
So my story touches on some of the same things that Freya mentioned, but I know when I'd been practicing for about, I was getting into my 7th year of practice, I started looking at, okay, what is my plan? And I sat down with my mentor internal to the firm, and he was saying, you need to really look at your business development plan and what's your view and vision for what you want to grow into as a practitioner. And so as I started filling that out, I started realizing I was also filling out alternative paths that I didn't necessarily share with him, but what other than remaining on Bay Street and practicing private practice, was available to me. And that's where I started to explore. And so I started to be, you know, a little bit more interested in what was coming up in the ORs. I was leveraging my network. So if I thought, oh, maybe I want to be in-house counsel in this organization or that organization, I was talking to friends of friends and getting in contact with those individuals and having information interviews. I think I interviewed with somebody, or I had a conversation with somebody at CBC who was in-house counsel there, at pharmaceutical companies to find out what they do there. Within government, because my husband's in government, just to get some information about what that world looks like, and really just broaden my horizons, because I kind of felt like I wanted to be open. I could be interested in many things, but for me, it was about the people and finding a place where I could really leverage my strengths and really work in my strengths, which is working with and through people, being more creative, and maybe in a little bit less of an antagonistic environment, because I was practicing in high stakes litigation and that was starting to sort of wear on me. And this opportunity came up in the ORs. I thought, well, the only way I'll really know about this role is if I apply and get my foot in the door for an interview. And so that was how I was able to get more information on this role of learning and development. And it was actually a new role within the firm that hadn't existed before. And through meeting the people who were involved in this space and sort of learning about their vision for what they wanted to create, that's what excited me. So it was really about meeting people, talking to them, hearing about their stories, and actually interviewing for potential jobs that I got more of a sense of what is my way forward and what is my instinct and my intuition telling me about the next step. Because it's not an easy leap to take away from private practice, away from that security of a very clearly outlined path for the way forward. But that's getting into other questions that you're going to pose to us, Rhonda, so I will stop there.
So, Michelle and Maud, so your law degree and knowledge of the law are used in part to achieve business objectives and to serve your client. Please describe how law and business intersect in your respective careers. So let's start with
Trying to take this out.
I got it.
I got it. Business and law. So the first thing I have to say about that is actually I find that dichotomy creates more of a problem than it solves. And that's because in my experience, when the legal team, the legal function is not seen to be supporting business decisions or as part of the business, that leads to being seen as a barrier. It leads to being seen as unnecessary or an afterthought or a cost center. And so I think that dichotomy is a bit of an issue. The business units often think that law is just a different function, and it's not really a different function. It may be that there's some compliance issues. It may be that we are providing advice, but the function is still a business. It is conducting business. The other issue around legal versus business is that we sometimes use language, and this is from an in-house lawyer's perspective, we sometimes use language of saying, oh, well, that's a business decision. So us, the lawyers, are not going to make that decision for you, and now we hand it over to a business unit. And what we're really getting at there is just making sure that it's clear who's accountable for the decision making, and that person has the information and advice necessary and the ability to make the decision. And then the in-house lawyer has to implement a decision, and sometimes those decisions are not what we would have liked. So there's always the possibility that our advice is simply not followed. And we don't have the ability to say, okay, well, we're not going to participate in that. If we're in an in-house team, we're probably the ones that are helping to implement that very decision that we actually said, don't do this. So I have a story about a time when I was asked to devise a negotiation strategy for a deal where the hospital I was working for took on a deal where on behalf of a large pharmaceutical company, we were going to negotiate agreements with around 150 clinics across the country, and I advised that that might be a difficult use of our resources because it would be difficult to put in place procedures that really satisfied that pharmaceutical sponsor and yet also effectively negotiated with all those sites while maintaining our hospital's own relationships with that community. And of course, I was overruled. So then I was implementing that very same strategy and putting time and energy into play that I had advised against.
Interesting.
So when it comes to business for me, I think it's very similar. In terms of for our client group, it's really a matter of advising from beginning to end. So from the moment that the client decides that there's a certain policy initiative that they want to implement, the role of counsel in that sense would be to try to give them a framework or sort of the boundaries of the legal environment that we are currently in. Sometimes it means that because the legislation that's currently in place does not allow them to do X, maybe legislation has to change. And so we help them with the drafting of the legislation, et cetera. And of course, if the initiative then is implemented, a program is developed as a result, the advice that we provide is ongoing with regards to the operations of that program. So issues that come up, contracts that are being entered into, regulations that need to be drafted so that the actual statute can be implemented. Or, for example, maybe there's an FOI request and so FIPA comes into play. From the operational level, there's also possible litigation that comes out of certain initiatives that are taken, and we defend the client as well in litigation. In the case of MEG, there's the Crown Law Office Civil, which does all of the litigation, but let legal services branches, counsel within those branches, assist their clients with regards to working with the Crown Law Office Civil lawyers to advise them on and give them instructions on certain parts of the file. So whenever I think about business per se, I think our role as counsel with MEG and the legal services branches, we have a dual role. We have the role to the Attorney General. We have a dual reporting relationship to the Attorney General and to our client, our Deputy Minister for that specific ministry that we're housed in, that we have a legal services branch in. And sometimes there are things that our clients may want to do that may be in conflict with the role of the Attorney General. And we have to be able to provide advice in those instances that deals with both issues. So there are times when it gets a bit strange in terms of being sort of not split into two because we're always Attorney General lawyers, but knowing what our client's goal is and making sure we're helping them reach that goal, meet that objective that they've set out, and making sure also that we're meeting our obligations as Attorney General lawyers. So it's an interesting position to be in.
Thank you very much. So Avvy and Keya, and feel free, any of you who want to jump in, because all of you have experienced this. Mike, right. Thank you. So what are the challenges and benefits to your legal career? And what are the ups and downsides to leaving private practice in your view? So Avvy, you start, Keya, and then anyone else that wants to contribute to the discussion.
Right. Although I'm not sure I exactly left private practice because I was never asked to join after I finished my article. It was like, bye. I guess, part of it is because as I was explaining earlier, I was involved in some community groups, and I was doing downtown legal services. And so I kind of made the decision at that point when I was in law school that even though I knew nothing about law, I was literally a new immigrant to Canada. I knew nothing about legal system, but something was happening that I thought was wrong, right? So I still remember, for instance, at DLS, we have this 75-year-old woman came in, a Chinese-speaking woman, because at that time the clinic where I worked didn't exist. So we had a satellite clinic in Chinatown. So I was one of the very few Chinese-speaking students, law students, and even fewer who were willing to work in that Chinatown clinic. And I saw this 75-year-old woman who came in, walked with 2 canes. She was charged with shoplifting, right? Because she wandered from Eaton's into Eaton Center with the garment in her hand, and she was like caught red-handed, right? So to speak. And so I had to go to court with her. And of course, she was like absolute discharge, like nothing happened. But I also remember another woman came in, like 25-year-old, just came to Canada. She was sponsored by her fiance. And at that time, there was a Law and Immigration Act that you had to marry your fiancé within 90 days and report to immigration within 180 days, or else you will be deported. So this woman was being abused by her fiancé and didn't know whether she should marry him, suffer the abuse, or get deported. She was like really conflicted. I had absolutely no idea what to do to help her. And my supervisor, who was a second-year law student, didn't either. So I kind of decided, okay, as soon as I became the clinic director of the clinic where I work now, that was one of the first charter challenge that I did. So the upside is working in a legal clinic. If you're into social justice, public interest law, then you're right at home, right? This is the kind of work that we do. And who knows? One day you may become a premier, because Premier-elect of Alberta used to work in Parkdale, as I was told. So there's a lot of satisfaction, of course. But of course, the downside is there are very few resources. So it's very strapped with resources. You have to do everything, and very high volume client, and the pay is not very good, right? So the first 7 years of my work at the clinic, my salary remains the same, and it's around $47,000. So you're really not in it for the money, but the upside is every time when you win, and if you win big, then it's like it's high, right? So we got for instance, we were involved in the Chinese Head Tax and Exclusion Act redress, and we got the government to apologize and pay for their historical wrongs. But the down is that every time I lose, it's like someone get deported, or sort of like they don't get, they are not able to get their old wages back. It's kind of hit you, but at the same time, it also motivates you to do better or try to change the law. So I would say there are more ups than downs. I would the challenges are there, but I think there are challenges everywhere, anyways.
So for me, I was in private practice, and what I think I gained from that period of time being in private practice was just learning how a law firm functions, how to be very professional, how to meet deadlines, how to be a written advocate and an oral advocate. All of these skill sets have served me in this current role, where I do have to understand where the practicing lawyers are and what their experience is in order to speak to them about these other aspects of being successful in a law firm setting. What I do think is exciting about the work that I do and the path that I've taken is it's really a trend in what's happening in the private practice arena with the new age of alternative fee arrangements and pressures on big law firms to find other ways of doing things. There's also these new opportunities that have opened up, just like my role of being learning and development director. There are other roles in firms, including mine, where you can be a knowledge management lawyer, a legal project manager, business development professional who maybe has that law experience and has been practicing and can use that experience and leverage that experience in entering the business development world. So what I think is really interesting about this path and this sort of new way of existing in a private practice setting in an alternative fashion is that it's so many new opportunities that it opens up, and sort of the sky's the limit. And you can enter into these roles and really grow into them and grow them and become a trusted advisor within that law firm setting in a way that maybe wasn't possible 5-10 years ago. So it's an exciting time to be on a different path, and that's what I think is really inspiring about the path that I'm on. And I'm at a firm that really supports me. I'm getting my credential as a professional coach, and they're supporting me in getting that credential. I'm becoming an adult educator through just this experience of developing and designing training programs and working with people in our other offices who have years and years of experience. And so if you're somebody who really likes to learn and grow and stretch, sometimes being on this journey in these alternative careers can give you that space to flex different muscles and to sort of lead you in paths that you didn't even know existed when you started out. Because I can say, you know, day one at law school when I was sitting and looking at my contemporaries at University of Toronto, I would have never predicted that I'd end up where I have, and so the journey continues.
Freya, did you want to add anything to that, or address, you know, the third question, which was why you decided to leave the particular firm you were at, and what was missing from the firm practice, and how you got this elsewhere?
Yep, absolutely. So when I left BLG as an equity partner, it was a big decision because born and raised on Bay Street and you've got an equity position, it's very difficult. But I really wanted to pursue that which made me happy, which was the administrative and public law for people who can't pay Bay Street rates. So, I mean, I'm going to go, I need to build the practice if I'm going to be happy, because we have to practice for like 35 years. So you can't stay or longer probably, can't stay too long in a place where you're unhappy. I wasn't unhappy, but I was getting there. And I will say one thing, I walked across the street really to Cavalluzzo's. I had spent 20 years concerned about the role of women in law firms, and particularly women in management. I got involved after the Bertha Wilson report in the early 1990s. I worked on an advisory committee to the Law Society's Retention of Women project. I led 2 task forces within BLG on the role of women in management and promotion and opportunities. I walked over to this boutique labor firm. There's 2 senior women, Liz McIntyre and Mary Cornish, who are both now in their 60s, but real trailblazers with booming practices. More than half the partners were women, and it was like not an issue. So 20 years when it was a central issue, and it still is to me, because I'm concerned about the women leaving the profession. I'm concerned about the lack of leadership. But to be in an environment where that wasn't even an issue, so I know I could never actually go back to kind of a male-dominated law firm, and no disrespect intended. But I absolutely loved having that freedom, made such a difference to me. And the other thing I will say about, if you're missing something in your firm, but you don't necessarily have the courage right now to leave, what can you be doing? My legal extracurricular life has just been of such a great reward to me. Started off with NUL and AIDWIC. The Canadian Bar Association, always been important. A lot of work with the Advocate Society, and more recently with SOAR. I do a lot, you know, so I could, I suppose, be doing more, like, I don't know, watching television, but I read a lot and I write a lot. But I get so much out of it, and I learn so much, and I get to meet and work with a lot of younger people or people in the immigration bar who I would never know otherwise. And I just find that that is so fulfilling. And doing that kind of work, that kind of volunteer work, you probably look and say, I can't possibly do it. What about my family? Or I have to put in more hours. Yeah, I think you just got to squeeze that time for yourself, because it will help you explore other options. And I have just found, as I'm sure the benchers, like, they're insane. They put in at least 600 hours a year on the side, on top of their regular jobs. But they get an extraordinary amount out of that kind of commitment. So if you can find time to volunteer on a committee, do an LLM, those professional LLMs or whatever, you will probably feel better and happier about yourself. And a happy lawyer makes better choices.
Absolutely. Michelle and Avvy, how have the career expectations of law students today changed from the time you graduated from law school? So let's start with you, Avvy.
Oh, okay. So I graduated like many years ago. I have to say that I feel very, very sorry for the people who are graduating today. I think it's extremely hard to enter into a profession, make a decent living, and choose, sort of like have the freedom to choose what you want to do. Like, when I started, I have to say, looking back, I was very, very fortunate. Like, I chose, when I decided to leave Wormforce, I got a job right away, and I didn't even really look for it. It just kind of dropped on my lap because somebody told me, oh, East Toronto is looking for someone, and I just called them up, and I got the interview and got the job, right? So it's like, and a lot of the opportunities was like that at the time, like, and I also worked for Leaf for a while when I was doing my bar exam. Again, it's like somebody through the grapevine, I heard that they are looking, and I called them up, right? So, and I took the opportunity. And then after that, I got a call from Core Changes program. Someone nominated me to sit on the Equality Rights panel, so I joined them. So it's like opportunities were created, and there were a lot more, I think, at that time. It seems. But now it's so competitive. Like, I was, because I have to hire articling students, summer student. With the marks I had in law school, I don't think I can get an articling job today, like, And then they all have, like, pro bono law, like this and that and whatnot, right? But they still have a hard time getting an articling position. And of course, like, it's even more difficult if you're racialized or, have other, or belong to other equality-seeking groups. So, I mean, and the tuition fee is like, 10 times higher than, what we paid at that time. So I can understand why, if you're just started the career, you want to get a good paying job, so to pay off your student debt. But it doesn't always happen that way. So it's extremely, extremely difficult. And I honestly don't even know how to advise, other than, like, I think it's a good thing to be involved in as many things as possible. If nothing else, because you will hear more about the opportunities that may arise, right? So if, like, somebody is looking for something, like, and then don't be afraid to take the opportunity that is presented to you. I never thought, am I qualified? Like, it's never even entered my mind. It's like, okay, you asked me to go, sure, I'll do it. Like, I never even thought, am I qualified? Am I, like, I don't even know enough to know I'm not qualified. I just take it, right? So I think just be not afraid, right? And just take whatever chance that you get.
Michelle.
Wow, I agree wholeheartedly with a lot of those comments, well, all of them actually. I am seeing students that have taken opportunities to do a little bit of work, pro bono work and other kinds of activities, a lot more than I feel I had when I was coming out of law school, although I did participate on the Law Journal. But, I'm seeing people with actual hands-on experience in law firms and really great opportunities. That being said, obviously there's a huge competition for jobs right now, early in career, and that's a big challenge. So I was called in 2000, and I finished law school in '97, and in that period of time, it actually was very difficult to get an articling position. I talked a little bit before that I was delayed in getting one. It took me an extra year over some of my friends from law school. But that being said, I also took an opportunity that was nothing like what I sort of imagined myself doing. So again, not really thinking about, am I qualified to do residential real estate? No. I'll just do it and we'll see what happens. So what I'm seeing in students these days is almost an earlier attempt at specialization. There are a lot of students who are trying really hard they've specialized in law school and they're coming out with this very clear focus of what they're going to do. And maybe that works out for them, or maybe they actually discover they love something completely different. I'm not really sure, but it may actually limit their choices that they're making at the point where they're attempting to get the beginning of their career going, because they're trying to get it in the particular path that they've sort of set out for themselves. I am seeing a lot more interest in in-house positions. It's almost like we're suddenly on the map, in-house lawyers, and a lot of careers are starting in-house now. And so there is still in the profession an assumption that people are in private practice for many years and then go in-house. I grew up in-house. I was in private practice for articling and that's it. Otherwise, I've been in-house. And I'm seeing more and more of that in people's careers today. I'm seeing also a lot more interest in health law. That's something that, for some reason, people who work in banks really want to work in health law. I don't understand it, but they do. But there's a lot of interest in health law. I do see students having better networking skills. They're coming out with more of an ability to leverage the interactions they have had. And I hope that that's working for them. And if you want to strengthen networking skills, you know, do more activities, meet more people, and keep letting them know how interested you are, and how bright you are, and how wonderful you are. And sometimes that helps. That's a little bit of what I'm doing right now, actually, because I'm in a career transition. And then finally, I think the main difference is social media exists now, and didn't really, or was in a very, very different state at the time when I was starting to practice. And what that means for an in-house lawyer is conversations that we might have had that were just personal conversations are conversations that young people today might be having on Twitter. And if they're in an in-house position, they may not realize that they're seen to be speaking on behalf of an organization, even though they're having what is essentially a personal conversation. And so it's just a different thing for people to think about.
Anybody else from the panel want to contribute to this at all?
I would just add one brief thing. When I finished articling, I was in a position of looking for another opportunity, and I just didn't limit myself geographically with respect to area of practice, because I thought, you know what, at the end of the day, whatever next step I take and whatever next opportunity I get, that's not necessarily my, if it even exists anymore, forever opportunity, but it's an opportunity, and it's an opportunity where I'm going to learn, I'm going to get skills, and I'm going to be able to move forward and you know, move on with my career. And so sometimes when I'm talking to students and they have a very specific, as you were saying, Michelle, you know, you can almost see the job and you don't know where it exists, but it's so exact and specific in what it is. It's sometimes easier if you broaden out and you open your mind, and then certain opportunities arise when you give yourself that freedom to say, maybe I'll give it a try and see what it's about.
That's a great comment. I actually applied for jobs in Whitehorse, Yellowknife, Rainy River, and I didn't get them.
But also Freya and I, we both worked on the Walkerton inquiry, and that took us to Walkerton, which is out of the city. I was on the Cornwall inquiry, that was also out of the city. I taught at Ottawa Law School as a visiting professor. That was also out of the city. So don't be confined just to Toronto. You may ultimately want to end up in Toronto, but there's amazing jobs, and you'll build up your skills maybe in Whitehorse or
Prince Edward Island, folks.
Prince Edward Island, and it's a completely different experience, and you meet different people, and it's a wonderful experience. Or going to graduate school, which some of us did. It's, you know, it enhances your credentials. You go to a new city. It's fantastic. So don't hesitate to think outside the box a little bit. No, it's you. Having problems here. So, what advice, and I open this up to the whole panel, and I'll start with Maud and Freya. What advice would you give to a lawyer who is contemplating leaving law altogether? And would you do anything differently if you had to start over again? What actually baffles me is when I started, when I started, I'm probably older than everybody on this panel, and it was a real struggle for women to get positions in law school. So maybe we were about 25%. When you hear Janet Miner speak, she's older than I am, and she can tell you all these amazing stories. She spoke at our holiday dinner at King Edward Hotel, and she just told us just the difficulties that women in her years encountered and how they had to break barriers. So, you know, I see now when I teach at Osgoode Hall Law School, and I look at the class, there's about 51 or 52% women. But they're not staying in the profession. And I'm saying to myself, you guys are so bright. It was so hard to get in. And why are you leaving? There's so many paths. Don't you want to get up in the morning and be passionate about your work? Do you want to be intellectually stimulated? Do you want to be financially independent? Isn't that important to you? So I am baffled by this, completely baffled. So we'll get some questions and some conversation going, because I'd like, like to hear where your thoughts are and how we, as senior members of the bar, can help you, how the Women's Law Association can help you to stay in the profession, because there are so many paths, and you don't have to work crazy hours. If you want to be on Bay Street, you can. It's fantastic. If you don't want to be on Bay Street and you want to do law reform or inquests or public inquiries or work in government or work in a house or work in a clinic or do really different interesting work downtown or work in different sized law firms, like just look at all these people who have pursue different paths, and some of us have done a lot of different things or are doing 3-4 things at the moment. So I go back to the question, and here you go. And I probably didn't speak in the microphone. I am so sorry, because I talk with my hands. Sorry.
So the advice I would give, if for women who are considering leaving the practice, is to do a lot of self-reflection. Try to figure out what it is that you're looking for in your career. It may be that, in my case, for example, when I decided to leave Crown Law Office Civil and go in private practice, I wanted to get a different experience. And right now, in my role as management, I'm not in the day-to-day sort of legal advice provision that I used to be in. So it's very different from what I was used to as counsel in the branch. And so self-reflect, find out what makes you, I like to say whenever I'm having a really good day at work, I say I feel like I'm on fire. And what is it? What is it for you that makes you feel that way? What is it that makes you feel like what did you say earlier? Like you're turned on? What turns you on, right? So self-reflection, I think, is very important to figure out what's working, what's not working. What are you looking for that you're currently not getting? And also be brave and ask for it. Sometimes it may be a matter of, so it's a full-time position right now and you want to maybe pull back a little bit and do a part-time sort of role so that you can balance things. Or you want to take a leave so that you can do, I don't know, another degree or do a year. I have a counsel in a branch right now who's taking a self-funded leave to travel for a year. And she gets to come back when she's done and go back into a role again if she does come back, right? So think about what you're looking for. Think about how you're going to get there, and then be brave enough to ask those who are either your manager or someone in your organization help you get there. Because I think oftentimes we're afraid that it's going to have some kind of reflection on us and our capabilities, and maybe she's not serious enough. In my case, I remember when we decided that we were going to start a family, and I was articling at the time, I thought, ooh, this is probably not a good time. Because articling is when you're supposed to prove yourself, right? And I remember being pregnant, and Crown Law Office Civil, as much as it's a government role, it's not it's litigation. And so the hours are not government hours as people expect, right? And so I remember having some late nights, and one of the senior counsel in the branch was leaving at the time, and he looked at me, he says, "Do you know you're pregnant?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm okay, I'm fine." I'm fine, because my goal then was, I'm not going to let anybody think that somehow because I'm pregnant, I'm gonna do less, right? So we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, and I think sometimes asking for that help that we need, asking others for ideas, how did they make it work? Find someone who did something that you think you wanna do, talk to them, interview them, get some feedback from them, and be courageous, and decide what kind of life or what kind of professional life career you want to have, and go out there and get it. And you'd be surprised how lots of things that I've done in the past where I think, ooh, this is not, but I'm just gonna try it and see what happens. Close my eyes, just kind of jump in. And somehow it works out. And somehow it seems to take me other places. Now, mind you, I have to confess, when it's happening, when I decide to kind of jump in, right when I get in, it feels very uncomfortable. And I'm doubting myself, and I'm thinking, this was probably not a good idea. But I stayed the course. You stay the course and kind of work it through, and somehow it takes you somewhere else. So self-reflection, speak to other people, figure out what it is you need, and always make a list. This is something I tell everybody. Make a list of the things that your advantages and disadvantages, whatever decision you're about to make it your left side, your right side. And I find that in the past, it's been very useful to me when I'm doubting my decision. That's when I use it to make my decision, and I use it when I'm doubting my decision to remind me of what I was thinking at the time when I decided to resign from the government. Who does that, right? Like, what were you thinking? And then that's just what I was thinking. Oh, okay, yeah. All right, so it turns out that, X, Y, Z is not the case, but here I am, and, you just kind of go forward. So, self-reflection.
And I sort of would emphasize just what you're saying, which is go for it. So my story was, I heard Rosie Abella was heading the Ontario Law Reform Commission. I wanted to work with her. I also wanted to stay in teaching. I was teaching at U of T. Keya was actually my student 100 years ago. And I had two really young kids. And so I said to Rosie Abella, I said, how do you feel about me working over 5 days, but a 4-day work week over 5 days? And she said, yeah, sure. So I could still teach at U of T. I only taught one course at that time, and I could still be home at a good hour. Go for it, ask. Don't be afraid. Who's next?
Okay. So I echo both of what Ronda and Maud have said, and I look at all of us, and we've all spent a minimum of 7 years of schooling and articling, trying to become lawyers. So before you throw that away, ask if there is something in this grand and glorious system of justice that you could do that would make you happy. And if it's not working in private practice, then explore all the alternatives that you possibly can. Because law, we have skills that we went to school to gain, and we can use those skills to transform the world through your charter challenges, or a small part of it through helping the old lady get off on her shoplifting charge, right? We have the skills. We're one of the few professions in the world that can make such a difference, whether at a policy basis, in a corporation, etc. We know that access to justice is at a crisis right now, and we can actually solve it if some of us are more willing to go out and offer unbundled legal services, or like Sarah Cohen, she's not here, she's interested in infertility law. She left and said, I'm going to open a whole practice that just deals with infertility law. Not an easy road to hoe, but she's done a great job at it. So that's important, which is, and I also feel, in a way, we have an obligation to other women, Rhonda, which is what you were talking about, that we have to keep, doing what we can if we enjoy it. I think dealing with guilt that we all probably have about our children. You've talked about ask about job sharing or ask about part-time hours. Another thing is, accept that you will never be the perfect mom, but try to make the best of it. if you accept that you'll have to spend more money, if you have to buy frozen supper salt dinners and hire a gardener, or maybe stop gardening for 5 years, even though you love it, because, you know, you have a limited amount of time. But kids are small for only a short period of time, and you have to support yourself and your family and contribute to society for about 40 years. So my biggest concern is women who leave the practice of law, stay at home with their kids, and don't think about how to keep themselves current when they're not there, and then I see them come back, and it is so difficult. Now, I deal with guilt constantly about my daughter, but at the same time, I know that she believes that I try to change the world. She does believe that, because she thinks lawyers just do all these amazing things. And I know that having a happy mom who feels confident in her life actually helps shape your children. So, you know, it will always be a struggle when it comes to working and having kids. And would I do anything differently? Absolutely. What you talked about, self-reflection, I wish I had done that at an earlier stage. But I was always kind of busy and having a great practice, and I loved what I was doing. And I didn't really think about how to make things better. I didn't really think about, could I go to a firm or a different style of firm where the role of women wouldn't be as difficult as it is in some of the mega firms. And I think I probably was a round peg in a square hole for a little bit too long. But I wouldn't change anything about these crazy volunteer things and teaching that I've done, because I've gotten so much out of that. And I probably wouldn't really, I just would encourage people to think, if you're not happy, and if you are, in what I have said to a few friends, in an emotionally abusive relationship with your firm, because tell you there's a hell of a lot of women that are being emotionally abused. They feel that they're not valued within their firms. They feel that their contributions aren't recognized, etc. If that is the kind of thing you're facing, start thinking now about making a change and embrace the changes that you make. And good luck.
I would like to add to what has been said, that when I'm talking to women, one of the things that I hear a fair bit is that they're feeling that their options are limited because they don't have maybe the qualifications or the experience that they think that a particular job needs. And I just want to say that it is okay to sell yourself on your potential. That is allowed in this profession, and it helps to be open and flexible with respect to what opportunities are out there. If there is a job that needs to be created and there's an opportunity to create it, go in and create it. And that is one way that people have had the ability to progress their career in different ways, because they've seen an opportunity, they go in and create it. I've had jobs that were not fully formed jobs when I took them, and I was scared as all heck to be able to figure out what was I going to do. I just do it my way, and if somebody doesn't like it, they'll tell me. So there's a certain amount of going in and trading on your potential that you should start doing very early in your careers.
I actually think you could be a better parent if you stay in the law. I think I'm a better parent because I stayed in the law. I think I'm a role model to my kids. I think I was able to, because I worked, hire someone to help me, help us clean the house and do some other chores that we didn't have to do, so that when we came home, we could bathe the kids and read them their books and put them to bed and then do their homework with them. I also think that women shouldn't be doing everything at home and having a full-time job. And I think you should make it clear to your partner early on that it's a half-half deal. You're important, and they're important. Your career is important, and their career is important. And I met my partner when I was 14 years old, and we went through school together. We went through graduate school together. You know, we went to graduate school with a U-Haul and a crib and a baby, and came back with a second one. But it's 50-50. And he is managing partner of a big law firm, and I'm not doing the carpool every morning. And he washes the dishes every night. I haven't washed a dish in all these years. it's 50-50, and it's important for the kids to see that as well. We shouldn't be doing everything. You can't do everything. You'll be stressed out.
And I would add to that, my husband is amazing. We've known each other since we were 18. We've been together since 18. So again, we've grown together. And with our 2 kids, I have an almost 8-year-old and a 4-year-old. So I'm really in the thick of the mommy and daddy need to be present in our kids' life. And we both make a priority, our kids a priority, and our work a priority. Today he had to go home earlier so that I can come to this. So those type of things that we do for each other. But what I wanted to also add, Michelle, is I heard a statistic. I hope it's actually, anyway, I heard something yesterday. I don't know what the numbers
make up
actually.
statistics now, everyone.
But it's what I heard, and I think there's some truth to it because I also read it in Lean In, something similar to that. That oftentimes when males see a job ad, they think, if they have about 50% of the qualifications, they think, I'm going to go for that. I'm going to apply. And whereas with females, we wait for maybe 100%, 95%, and then even then we're thinking, ooh, I don't know if I can do it. I can tell you that from my first management role, which was at Omafra, I probably had about 60, and it was making me very nervous when I was applying. But lucky enough, at the time, I was reading Lean In. And I thought, okay, let's give this a try. What's the worst that can happen, right? I get a no, and then I'm just back to square one. And then it's not so bad. So I tried, and funny enough, I actually got the job, right? So I wouldn't have done it but for, I'm not kidding, and I'm a Catholic, so I'm telling you, it's the honest truth. It's the honest truth that I was reading Lean In at the time, and I thought, okay, maybe this is what she's talking about, I'll try it. So just, that 100% and the 50%, that's such a huge difference in how we see things, and I think we need to kind of take more risks, right?
I do hear that a lot when I'm talking to women. And, think about it. You cannot advance your career if you need 100% of the qualifications for a job because you'll be doing the same job over and over and over again. So it just doesn't work.
So I guess I may not be the right person to talk about this because I don't have any kids. I do watch a lot of TV.
I have a cat. I have a cat and he doesn't do the dishes.
I play with other people's kids and I return them when they cry or whatever. However, I am a workaholic and I work 7 days a week. So, and I know that a lot of women actually, most of the time they leave because of family obligation, right? So I guess my advice is really think about the reasons why you're leaving and whether you can, I think, sort of echo some of the things that say, whether it's something that is external in the sense that things that you cannot change or things that you have some control over, and do you want to leave entirely or maybe leave part way? So if you're just leaving a job but not the profession kind of thing, right? So you may not be able to work, and in fact, it may not be healthy for you to work in that particular environment where you're working now because they don't allow you to be both a mother or, caretaker for your parents or whatnot and be a lawyer at the same time. And maybe that's a place that you don't want to stay anyways. But that doesn't mean you have to leave the profession. And I think that's, a lot of people tonight are talking about there are so many options. Although I think it is hard, for my experience at the clinic, we had a staff lawyer who had to leave because she had to take care of 2 very kind of, challenging teenagers, right? And it wasn't, I don't think it was possible to work part-time and do that at the same time at the clinic setting, particularly in our clinic, just because it's a small office and very, very high volume client. But there may be other clinics that with a more staff and, sort of a different kind of pace that you can do that. But definitely you can be a part-time adjudicator, for instance, right? And there are many opportunities out there. So I think just before you make the final decision, try to explore different options first.
Okay.
I would just add one thing. I mean, we can all give advice and it's relatively in a vacuum without knowing your particular stories, but I think what's most useful is just to hear everyone, speak about their own experience. And maybe there's a nugget there or a piece that resonates with you, and that's a piece of information you can hold with you. I know Riva Seth has published a book called The Mom Shift, and she's interviewed, professionals across different sectors, including the legal practice, and sort of how do they successfully, as mothers, reintegrate back into practice or find alternatives to practice. And I think it's really about just us sharing stories and sharing experiences. I will say that I left the traditional path of law when I was single and did not have any kids. So sometimes it's other factors that motivate you to look elsewhere.
Some of you must have questions for members of the panel, so you can direct it to the entire panel or you can direct it to an individual person. Anybody like to ask a question? Thank you.
Thank you. My question kind of follows up on something that Rhonda said earlier about kids in the profession, just kind of the timeline when it sounded like you had children. I'm not sure, but
Yes.
I've noticed a lot of lawyers tend to have them later in life. But for those of us who have children earlier, it can be challenging marketing yourself as someone who's like, I'm just as dedicated, I'm just as stimulated by law, I'm just as eager to be good at what I do. But I'm just not as flexible in terms of like, I can't take a job in Yellowknife, I can't take a job in Whitehorse, I can't go to every networking event. But in terms of my ability to do the job well, like I don't really believe in mom brain. So, but it's hard in a competitive environment then to still market yourself when you can't go to every event, you can't take every possible job that gets posted and still be a competitive candidate.
I mean, I think focus on what you can do and keep doing it. So you've set some clear boundaries for, I can't attend every single networking event, and I'm not going to Whitehorse or Prince Edward Island if the opportunity should arise, because you have other commitments and boundaries around, what's possible. But to me, and I've been out doing job searches multiple times, it was just about being consistent in the techniques that I did use and motivating myself and pushing myself, because there can be ups and downs in that job search where some days you're feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited and I'm ready to go, and other days you just sort of feel like, oh my gosh, I don't even care, like I want to hide away from this. But when you set up a routine and you sort of say, okay, this is what I'm willing to do and this is how I'm going to approach it on either a daily or a weekly basis, and just really own that and get into that space of that opportunity will come along. That's all you can do, and to focus on that positive, because I really do believe in that positive energy. It helps things, and sometimes focusing on the negative can only hurt. So I think focus on all of the great stuff you probably are doing to conduct that job search and that networking.
Thank you. Someone else have a question in the audience? Yes. Over there. White dress. Or white shirt, no.
Oh, that's okay. It's a big room with a high ceiling. I actually have two questions. I guess the first one is, what do you think it'll take to change perceptions on work-life balance? Like, I think that you don't need to work 18 hours a day, and I've spoken to many lawyers that say the same thing, to be an amazing lawyer, whether you're a litigator or on the transactional side. And I've noticed that people that take time out for self-development and learn other kind of disciplines are actually better lawyers. But those are very rare. So just if you can talk about what it will take to get there. Like I know there's more innovative firms that are coming up in Toronto, I'm not going to name them, but there's quite a few that let women work from home. They can be traveling and they can be contributing to their work, whatever it is. So with technology and the usage of technology, there's more options. But do you think we're there? What do you think it'll take? And the second question is also for anybody on the panel, but maybe Freya more so. Do you think that your experience in the private sector was useful and applicable when you went towards the public side? Because I mean, a lot of people that I meet, they go into law school with these dreams of changing the world. By third year, you're just a completely different person for whatever reason and circumstances. And like, I know a lot of people that are going towards the private side because, they've got loans to pay off, they still think those skills will be applicable. But what is it that you think was, do you think that experience was useful for you? And secondly, would you have done it differently if you had a choice to go back?
So I'm still in the private sector, and I love being in private practice because I get to choose my clients, develop my clients, I get to pursue really interesting cases, etc. So I think what you get from being in the private sector is control over your life, control over what you do. You can practice law at an incredibly high level in the private sector. Now, what you don't have and probably never will have is work-life balance. So I'm just pushing back on you a little bit. I don't know what you mean by work-life balance or what sort of you're looking for. I think that in the private practice of law, we pay our salaries and those of our assistants and law clerks and the junior lawyers through the amount of money that we bill to clients. So we have to generate that money, so you have to make a choice at what price point do you fall along the spectrum. I've chosen to step off of the highly remunerative Bay Street track, but I still the primary family support, so I have to make a certain amount of money. And I need to spend time with my husband and my daughter, but I also need for my purposes to teach and speak and write. So probably a lot of people think like I'm insane, probably like Avvy, that I do work a lot and a lot of it's pro bono and and volunteer, etc. It is part of what makes me feel whole and passionate about everything I do in life. So probably no one would ever say I have work-life balance, but I am actually at a spot on the spectrum where I feel so rewarded. I feel like I'm blessed to have been called into this great profession. And if I feel that way after 26 years, it says that, there's something good about private practice and there's something good about law. But you have to find that space within yourself. But if people walk in and say, I want to have work-life balance in a private law firm, that's not exactly the way I don't think, ever going to work.
I'll take a different approach. I actually think you could have some work-life balance. So my partner, as you know, works in a big law firm, and he exercises 6 days a week. He goes to yoga on the weekend. He goes to a trainer on the weekend. He's been an equal partner. At Christmas, we hiked in Guatemala and Belize. Our children don't live in this country. One child's an economist. She lives in London, England. Another child is on TV in the States. So it's important to us that we see our children. So we work really hard, and yes, we do work on some weekends, but when the kids were little, we took them to swimming, and we took them to violin lessons and piano lessons. I think you can have a work-life balance. I think you need a partner that does this 50-50. I think that's critical. I think guys should take paternity leave. I know it exists, but I think they're afraid to take it. They're afraid of the repercussions. We've got to encourage them. Firms have to encourage them to take leave so they can have bonding time with their children, and so they can also allow their spouse to get back into the workforce.
I have another take.
Could I just make one question here to clarify? I guess we all have different definitions of what work-life balance is, so I'm happy with my work-life balance. But I guess it's, when people say that phrase, I'm thinking, no, you can't leave at 4 every day. But that's not what I do, so I think, Rhonda, you put it nicely in terms of where the balance is.
Okay. One last comment from Michelle, and then I'm going to introduce you to our treasurer, who will say a few words.
So my comment on this is that I think there is obviously a definitional issue, but it is what's going to work for you. And that can be very difficult to find because when you're looking for employment, your employer, of course, does have certain expectations about times, and it may be difficult to negotiate the kinds of times that you have available given other commitments in your life. So that being said, I think that we have a cultural shift in Canada to do, and in North America generally. There's a book by Posens called Is Work Killing You? Where one of the points made in that book is that it ends up falling onto an individual employee to try to find the ways to achieve work-life balance. But in order to really see a shift, it needs to fall on the employer to not allow work to kill the employees. So that's as a thought process. But in terms of some of the things that I've tried to do is really looking at, are there ways that I can streamline my own work so that I'm producing as efficiently as I possibly can, so that I can shorten the amount of time that I need to do the work that I'm doing and go home. That's one thing that I do try to do. I found myself working very, very long hours when I was earlier in my career, and so this is definitely a challenge for people earlier in their career. And I also wanted to do other things additional to my paid work. I took a master's in law, so I was working long hours at work, and then I was working all weekend long on schoolwork, and then I got sick. And that's life. You know, I ended up getting diagnosed with thyroid cancer, and I had to deal with that while I was doing all these other things. So that taught me to be able to say to people, look them very seriously in the eye and say, no, that will not be available for you on Tuesday. I need more time. And unless it met a certain definition of urgency, and I actually defined urgency for people, I had my own definition in my career, and it had to do with who's going to be harmed if we don't get this by that deadline, how much money will we be losing if it doesn't come in on that day. I mean, it was really, this is what is urgent. So it really had to do with managing expectations, but that's not going to be enough to make a cultural shift. It is going to take time, and that's the best that I can say.
Thank you very much. I would like now to take the opportunity to introduce you to Janet Miner, the Treasurer of the Law Society of Upper Canada, to make some remarks. She's hidden in our audience. And just to mention, Treasurer Miner is the fourth woman treasurer of the Law Society. She's been in public law most of her career. As I mentioned to you, she is the first treasurer whose career has been in the public sector. She's been a bencher since 2001. And Janet Miner has argued many really important cases on behalf of the Ontario government and has appeared at all levels of courts. She was a general counsel at the constitutional branch of the Ministry of the Attorney General. And Janet Miner has been very committed to women's issues, Aboriginal issues, challenges faced by racialized lawyers, and issues involving access to justice. She's been very active in the Women's Law Association. In fact, she won the President's Award in 2003, and as I mentioned, she was the keynote speaker at our holiday dinner and had us all laughing and in tears by the end of the evening at the King Edward Hotel in November. A couple of years ago, Janet Miner received the ALOC Carol Creighton Award for her contribution to public law, and in the same year was the recipient of the Zenith Award celebrating leading women lawyers from Lexpert. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Janet Miner.
Thanks, Rhonda, and I'm sorry I couldn't be here for the whole discussion. So having heard a bit of it, I'm already going to put my 2 cents in, I have to say. Anyway, first let me say welcome, and it's a pleasure to be in a room full of women lawyers, and it's a pleasure to be partnering with the Women's Law Association, which has made such a contribution throughout the years. I've been a member longer than I can remember, and so we won't check. But I've always found that the ability to speak to other women, often in the same circumstances or different circumstances, which can be interesting, provide not just support, but in a way, I think, collectively, some power. So I think that's very important to keep it up, and I really compliment the Women's Law Association on what it's doing now and what it's done in past. I was going to talk a bit about what the Law Society has done to try and assist women. The last major initiative was designed to assist women in private practice. That is not because women, like myself, in the public sector were not worth helping, but there seemed to be more of a problem in the private sector because women were leaving disproportionate to men, and for, I think, the predictable reasons, family responsibilities. And it seemed that that should not have to happen. And we spent quite a long time under the leadership of later Treasurer Lori Politza, and Bonnie Workington, who's now a judge, they led a Retention of Women project, it was called, and did a lot of work on it, ranging from consultants with interviews and focus groups to meetings with Main Street women to experts, and came up with a number of initiatives. One that we think has been successful and has been picked up, frankly, by most of the provinces. José's going to correct me if not all, but most of the other provincial law societies, was our Justitia project. And that started by attempting to engage representatives from the larger firms. Any firm was eligible, but the larger firms were of particular interest because that seemed to be where many of the women were reaching a stage and then leaving and not coming back. And so there were sort of two groups, the large firms and the more medium-sized firms. We asked them to sign up, make a commitment to trying to assist retention of women, send a representative to meetings, and they were divided into those two sizes, to come up with ideas. Now, of course, it's not the case that no firm had any policies about women, of course, or for women. Many of them did. They were not necessarily consistent. They were not necessarily well known. And in fact, we frequently heard that it was only on inquiry, and after people were kind of nervous about having to inquire, that they found out that other people had been in the same circumstances and might have worked out a deal with the firm, but it wasn't very well known. So all of these very helpful and committed women representatives put their heads together and came up with a number of best practices. Another thing that's called a toolkit, which is designed to help women who are in firms in sort of more than one way. One is that if you're thinking of taking a leave for family responsibilities or others, what do you do to try and make sure that there's a ramp back, that you can get back without a feeling like you're starting from scratch again? And when you're there and you have the usual pressures about finding business, maintaining business, dealing with requirements of firms, what's out there that you can rely on to be of assistance and to bring it forward. And they spent a fair bit of time doing that, and I think it's a pretty impressive package that they came up with. Part of the deal was that if the firms had signed up, we were looking for some commitment that they would then follow through, and also that part of the sign-up attraction was that it would be for them. Of course, that only lasted so long because it was sufficiently helpful that we thought it had to be shared with everybody, no matter whether you had signed up or not. So two things I can tell you now. The whole thing has been launched into the public realm. It's available on our website, and José can provide you with any more details, or Jennifer can, with any more details that you need to find that. But it's worth looking at no matter where you are, because I think some of the tips resonate across practice areas and practice sizes. Another point I would make, and I'm not sure we can say this is absolutely statistically forever valid, but we are looking at some of the stats about departures from firms, and it appears that since this project has been underway, those stats have improved. That is to say, women are not leaving with the same rapidity. I think it's probably too close a time to be able to say it's for sure a one-to-one result, but we're very pleased to see that is at least happening. What my 2 cents that I wanted to enter into this was the whole balance issue and the role of spouses. And in my last life, I was at the Constitutional Law Branch, and we had a number of young, extremely good male lawyers who came from private firms initially, so they weren't people who started in government. And when it came time that they had children, all of them, to a one, took paternity leave. And that was relatively new for us. I think it was pretty impressive. What concerned me was that they had said if they were still at their previous firms, they wouldn't have felt as comfortable about doing that because they thought there was some stigma or some criticism that would be attached. So I think on the positive side, it indicates that men want to, and especially I think it's partly demographics. I think it's more more evident in men under 40, like, can I put it that way? And that's wonderful. Obviously, the downside of that is that not all firms are there yet in their culture and how they approach things. And I think it's for women to try and promote that too. If you're at a big firm, I encourage the young fellows to take paternity leave too. It's important for family life and it's important for them. So that's just my 2 cents on that. We also, at the same time, were looking, this is back to Justitia, we were also looking at the small and sole firms. And they don't have the same resources to deal with departures from firms. One of the things we were concerned about, we were hearing from people on, was the fact that, I'm from a small firm or I have my own firm. If I take a leave, that's the end of it. And you hear from women more my age about how when they took maternity leave, they took 3 weeks kind of thing because they had to get back to run their practices. And so one of the thoughts by the on the task force was to establish a registry of lawyers who were prepared to work for a few months, maintaining and running someone's practice while that person was on leave. And it could be longer than a few months, but the persons who signed up knew they weren't signing up for permanent jobs. They were signing up to assist people on a temporary basis. And there's a range of people who want to do that. People who just don't want to have a full-time job, people who are looking at winding down from their own practices but don't really want to leave practice and have a lot of experience, and lots in between. And there has been some take-up on that. I don't know what the stats are recently. We've had a lot of take-up of sign-ups anyway, and I think also we've provided some help on what agreements might look like if you have to enter into them, of course, with those people. So that was one initiative. Another initiative, which has been somewhat controversial, was what we call PLAP, and that was the parental leave assistance. So same thing we were hearing from Smalls and Soles was that again, it was costly, and they didn't have unemployment insurance to cover their leave. The federal government came along and did initiate a program for self-employed people, and it is somewhat controversial over whether that is a good program or not. There are still people who are using PLAP and want to, and some stats are being collected on that, and that will be examined. I can't remember, do we have a date on that, Jose? Probably next year sometime? This year, okay, 2015. Yeah. Another initiative, what I want to mention, which has got nothing to do with the WLAO or the Law Society at the moment, but I think it's a really great sign, is that Women Criminal Defense Council are looking at special needs of women in the criminal bar. And they just had a very successful conference about, 6 weeks ago maybe, looking at some issues because they felt that our Justitia project really didn't go far enough. And we had not been looking at practice areas. We'd been looking at sizes of firms, and so of course most criminal defense counsel are in smalls and sole firms, but they say, and I understand why, they say that there's additional pressures on women in that particular practice area. So I'm very much looking forward to some of the work they're doing in data collection and surveying, and we've certainly said that we are prepared to assist in whatever way we can at the Law Society, and so I'm sure they're going to be stepping up. And I think it just does demonstrate how we all have to work together on what may be separate issues, but they often come down to the same thing, and that's how you manage a number of important personal commitments. So I should look at my script to see what I was going to say. I think that's probably enough. I just urge you to look at the website. We can all use whatever resources we can. And I also want to say, I know this was about diverse opportunities for women. I don't know how much of that was discussed in the panels, but this is one of those horrible things to say, when I was in law school, but when I started out, there were you know, there were things I never knew about that might have been possible, but it's so easy to get stuck in the rut of thinking you have to do what is traditionally expected. And as I often say to people, I started out in a private firm. When I moved to government, it wasn't because I wanted to leave private practice, it's just because I didn't particularly like the work I was doing at the private firm, and I was looking around. And then I discovered public law, and I never understood admin law in law school, not at all. And then when I actually started doing it, I loved it. And, you know, I did some human rights stuff, but I ended up really the bulk of my career as a constitutional lawyer, and the charter did not exist when I was in law school. And I just think it's really important to, you know, keep one's ears and eyes open about possibilities. There are so many more, it seems to me, even though I know the job market's tough, but the variety of work experience that's now available, I think is quite fantastic. It's just a matter of finding it and not thinking that one size fits all, because it doesn't. And I, you know, it used to be also that if you moved more than once in your career, you were really regarded as somebody who couldn't keep a job, and, you know, you must be a problem employee or something. And, you know, that's been washed away, I think, with these demographics. I mean, people change, people have some idea about what they need to do and want to do, and are prepared to go out there and look for it. And I say bravo to all of those people. So I've went on longer than I meant to, but anyway, thank you so much for coming, and please, we're moving on, I think, to the reception? A little bit more? Okay, Rhonda has some more to say.
I would like to thank Janet Miner for her work historically with all these issues, and as our leader of the Law Society, who's just doing a fantastic job. And we've been doing Justitia projects with the Law Society. We did one in the fall, we're doing one in, we're doing another one on leadership. And it's just our pleasure to work with the Law Society and have such a fervent leader. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So just before we mingle, I just want to let you know about some of the programs that are coming up. On June the 9th, we have an awards dinner, and we're going to have it at the Rosewater. And we have a President's Award, and this year we're awarding it to not an individual, but to a clinic, and it's to the Barbara Schleifer Clinic. And I don't know if the Women's Law has ever done that in the past, but we've decided that we would like to honor the clinic. Now, some of you may not know the story of Barbara Schleifer. Janet Miner and I are sort of that vintage. A very, very sad story where this woman was called to the bar in April of 1980. And she goes home after celebrating being called to the bar, and she's sexually assaulted and murdered in her apartment. She had two friends with her during law school, and they ultimately wanted to set up a firm together. And these two women, their names were Frances Rappaport and Patricia Ashley. They established in Barbara's honor the Barbara Schleifer Clinic. And this clinic helps more than 4,000 women each year dealing with issues of sexual violence. And they have an incredible team, so we are honoring them. We also have a General Counsel Award. We have 3 new chapters, as many of you know, at our organization. We've got a General Counsel chapter. Michelle's actually one of the founding members. We have a Young Lawyers chapter for lawyers under 5 years, and we've got an Articling chapter. And they're all, we've got awards for different people entering the bar at different times. So we have a General Counsel Award, which is going to Nori Campbell of TD. She's done incredible work with leadership in women. The Erden Burles Award, which recognizes a law student who's dedicated her time and talents to advancing equality rights. The Torkin Means Trailblazer Award, which recognizes law students or articling students for their leadership role in business and the law. They just opened it up to articling students. I know we have a number of articling students here, so the deadline for all these nominations were April 30th, but if you're involved, if you want to put your name forth for the Torkin Means Award, it's open till May the 12th. The Alvaro Farlam Advocacy Award is a new award designed to recognize outstanding participation in legal clinics at any of the Ontario law schools. A new award, the Learners Elizabeth Grace Award, a new award for women lawyers practicing 5 years or under who've been working in the area of sexual or domestic violence and have advanced the rights and interests of vulnerable people who have suffered or at risk of suffering violence or abuse. So that's June the 9th. We also have networking events at a pub during the summer. We've got a golf event August 19th. I don't know how to play golf at all, but it's fun. People will help us. It's a great networking event. Yeah, people will help us. They have a little training session where they show you how to use a club so you don't smash up their great greens. And just, it's a lot of fun. We also have a bunch of programs that we're working on in the fall with the various chapters. As I mentioned, the Digista Project. And we would love for you to come to those events. So, on behalf of the Law Society of Upper Canada and the Women's Law Association, I'd like to now present the panel with gifts in appreciation of their participation of the event. And I would also like to say that the Law Society is making a donation to Toronto Lawyers Feed the Hungry program, a really important program, as a recognition of the panel members' contribution. So Patty's going to give the gifts to the various panel members. Please join us for refreshments and further conversations. Thank you so much for coming, and I look forward to seeing you at events again. And we'll see each other again. Thank you.